Before we begin, I'd just like to mention that while I will try to cover most of the important rules of the game, this will not be a fully comprehensive tutorial but is rather meant to introduce the most important aspects for you to be able to start a game as soon as possible. The following tutorial only includes the base game of Through the Ages, A New Story of Civilization. Through the Ages is a digital adaptation of the Civilization tabletop game of the same name by Vladak Vatil. This adaptation was developed and published by CGE Digital. In Through the Ages, you and other players will create your own nation, building and upgrading infrastructure, training and upgrading units, recruiting historically significant people, and so on to create the most culturally relevant civilization. The goal in the game is to acquire the most culture points represented by this symbol. And you can check everyone's current culture points by clicking on the arrow on the right side of the screen. Almost everything you acquire in the game is represented by cards. Buildings, units, people, government types, and so on. The game is played in ages divided into rounds with each age bringing a different set of cards to choose from, and the game ends once you reach the 4th age. Each round, players will take turns with each turn divided into 4 phases: the politics phase, action phase, discard phase, and production phase. Before we get into the actions you can do in the game, first we'll need to explain the different essential statistics that you and other players will acquire and or improve to be able to do actions in the game. You'll find your statistics and their current production here on the top side of the screen, below the card row. Food is used to increase and maintain your population. Resource is used to build and upgrade structures. Science is used to develop technologies that will unlock new functions for your civilization. And culture, as mentioned earlier, is what will be measured at the end of the game to indicate the winner. Your food and resource can also be found here in their respective production buildings, represented by blue icons. These blue icons are taken from here, your blue bank. The blue bank represents the limit of the number of food and resources you can have available. However, a huge part of Through the Ages is managing your economy. Having too little available food and resources means having less actions available to you, and having too much can lead to consequences in the form of corruption, which we will explain in a later chapter. Anytime you gain and spend food or resources, they'll be taken from and returned to the blue bank. Aside from what we've mentioned so far, another essential statistic that you need to keep track of and improve is your military strength. You can find each player's military strength here on the right side of the screen, beside each player's name and portrait. We'll explain in depth later, but basically, you'd usually want your military strength to be higher than other players. Players with the highest military strength can receive a lot of bonuses, while players with the lowest military strength can receive penalties. It's also important to keep track of the difference in strength between you and the other players. Having a military strength higher than the others will not only protect you from attacks, but will also give you a higher chance of succeeding when attacking other players. Another important aspect we need to discuss are your action points. You can find your current number of action points here on the lower right side of the screen, and these will dictate how many actions you can do in a single turn. The white circles represent your civil actions, and the red circles represent your military actions. There are also 2 types of cards, military cards and civil cards, and the number of actions available to you will dictate the limit of the number of cards for each type that you can have in your hand. So, in this scenario for instance, we can only have up to 4 civil cards and 2 military cards in hand. As you can probably guess, you use civil actions to play civil cards and military actions to play military cards. We will explain what cards can do in the next chapters, but each card belongs to a certain age, which is the age they appear in. A card's age is represented by the icon on the top of the card. For instance, this card belongs to age A, which is why an A appears at the top of the card. The significance of this is that cards need to be played and can only stay in your hand before the end of the succeeding age. And take note that there is no other way to get rid of civil cards from your hand other than playing them. For instance, since this card appeared in age A, if it was in our hand, it can only stay there until the end of age 1. If it hasn't been played by then, the card will be removed from the game. The first turn of the game, called the Antiquity Age or Age A, is significantly different than the rest. During the first turn, the only thing each player will do is to purchase cards from the card row. You can find the cost to purchase each card here at the bottom part of the card row. As we can see, purchasing cards will cost civil actions as indicated by the white circles. The card can cost 1, 2, or 3 civil actions depending on how far to the right of the card row they are located. During the first turn, the first player will only have 1 civil action to spend on cards. The second player will have 2 civil actions, the third will have 3, and so on. There are different types of cards, and you can click on each card to read their effects. Another unique thing about the first turn is that cards do not replenish after each turn, which they do for the rest of the game. Cards will provide different effects that are presented either in the form of icons, which usually indicates an increased production of a statistic, or text. We'll explain some of these icons as we go through the tutorial when they become relevant. Green civil cards represent leaders. They provide ongoing effects for your civilization when played, and sometimes an activatable effect as well. For example, Aristotle, when in play, will provide 1 science every time we take a technology card from the card row. We'll explain technology cards in a later chapter. Leaders will stay in play and therefore provide their effect to you until they are either replaced or until they become antiquated, which happens at the end of the succeeding age. Take note that when a current leader gets removed in any way, you lose the ongoing bonuses they provide unless stated otherwise. They cost 1 civil action to play from your hand, but when playing a new leader with 1 still in play, you will receive a refund of the civil action used. Take note that you can only play 1 leader from each age, so choose wisely. Purple civil cards represent wonders. These are cards that do not go into your hand and are immediately played when purchased. However, they will not provide their effect until they have been constructed. Let's take a look at an example of a wonder to show how to construct them. You'll find the cost to construct a wonder here on the bottom center of the card. In this case, for the Library of Alexandria, we can see 3 numbers. This means constructing this wonder will require 3 civil actions, and the numbers represent how many resources per civil action need to be spent. Take note that you don't need to complete a wonder's construction in a single turn. You can construct a part or multiple parts in different turns, but they will be resolved from left to right. Once you've constructed a part of a wonder, one of the blue resource tokens used to pay for the part will be used to cover the built part. So stalling from completing a partially built wonder means you'll have fewer blue tokens in your economy, which may put you at risk of corruption, which we'll explain in a later chapter. You cannot purchase another wonder if you still have an unfinished one, and each subsequent wonder will increase the cost of wonders in the card row. For example here, we have 2 completed wonders. As we can see, this wonder should only cost 1 civil action to purchase, but it now costs 3. Yellow civil cards represent action cards. They cost 1 civil action to play from your hand and provide immediate bonuses. As an example, the Age A Cultural Heritage action card when played will immediately provide 1 science and 4 culture points. Take note that action cards cannot be played during the turn they were acquired. These are the only card types that will be available during Age A, but there are other civil card types that will appear in other ages, and we'll explain them later when they become relevant. Except for the first turn of the game, each turn will start with a politics phase. During this phase, the player whose turn it is may choose to play one of the available military cards in their hand. Cards that can be played during this phase are indicated by a crown symbol on their upper left side. There are 3 types of military cards that can be played during this phase. Green military cards represent event cards. Event cards are played in a separate deck here in the upper left side of the main screen. Cards on the left side of the arrow represent future events, and cards on the right side of the arrow represent current events. Every time you play an event, it will be stored in the future events pile, and a card from the current events pile will be resolved. Each pile will have a maximum of 4, 5, or 6 cards depending if you're playing a 2, 3, or 4 player game respectively. And once the current event pile empties, the future pile will be moved to become the new current event pile. So, playing events will give you a slight advantage as you'll have some idea of the cards contained in the deck that will be resolved in future turns, and you can plan for them accordingly. When playing event cards, you also immediately gain culture points equal to the number of culture icons indicated here on the upper right side of the card. Playing this event card, for instance, will immediately give us 1 culture point. Some event cards will show a territory instead of a description of an effect. We will explain these territories later. Another type of military card you can play during the politics phase are aggressions. These are attack cards that are immediately resolved and will provide bonuses if you defeat your chosen defender. These cards will cost military actions as indicated by the red circles on the upper left side of the card. For example, This aggression card costs 2 military actions to play. During an aggression, you and your opponent's military strength will be compared. And as mentioned earlier, you can find each player's current military strength here on the right side of the screen, beside each player's portrait. The player with the higher strength wins the aggression. However, during aggressions, the defender can play military bonus cards to temporarily increase their military strength. Here's an example of these cards. This one, for instance, will increase a player's military strength by 2 during aggressions. There is no limit to the number of military bonus cards that a defender can play during aggressions, and they can also play non-bonus military cards for a temporary increase in military strength by 1. If the defender wins an aggression, no rewards will be given. Wars are similar to aggressions, with the difference that they don't resolve until the start of your next turn, which gives the defender an entire turn to increase their military strength. But the defender cannot play any military cards to temporarily increase their military strength, unlike defending against aggressions. And if the defender wins a war, they will gain the rewards indicated on the card, unlike aggressions as well. Pacts are cards that add diplomacy to the game. They indicate effects for 2 civilizations. For instance, this pact card will allow one civilization to use 1 food as resource, and the other to use 1 resource as food every turn. When playing a pact card, you will be given the option of which player you'd like to make the offer to, and which effect of the pact you'd like for yourself. But of course, it is up to them if they will accept the offer or decline. Aside from using your political action to offer another player a pact, you can also use the action to cancel an ongoing pact between you and another player. Pacts are only available in 3 to 4 player games. During the action phase, you will spend your civil and military actions to perform different things. The first action I'd like to explain is increasing your population. Population in the game is represented by these yellow circle icons, and they are required for certain actions. In the main screen here, you'll find your yellow bank, the cost to increase your population, and any available population that you already have. Any yellow tokens in this box represent population that are available and ready to use. If empty, you can increase your population by pressing this button. The number on the arrow represents the food cost to do this action. In this case, increasing our population currently costs 2 food, and we can see up here and on the production building as well that we currently have 2. This cost will gradually increase as you take more and more yellow tokens from the yellow bank. This is where the division of the boxes become relevant. By clicking on the yellow bank, we can see that emptying the first box will increase the cost to acquire more population from 2 food to 3. Another thing we need to explain here is food consumption and happiness. At the end of your turn, your population will need to be fed depending on how many of these boxes are empty. For example, if the first box is empty, we will need to pay 1 food at the end of every round. Take note that aside from attacks and events, there isn't a way to return available population to your yellow bank, so you need to be careful when deciding to increase your population. Happiness, on the other hand, is important to prevent discontent workers and an uprising. We will explain later what happens during an uprising, but just keep in mind for now that it is something you'd never want to happen. Like most of the statistics in the game, happiness can be acquired through different cards with the happiness icon. Each happiness you gain will cover one subsection of the population bank from right to left, either a box or eventually columns. Having happy faces on subsections in the population bank prevents discontent workers and uprisings. If you have more empty subsections than you have happy faces, these empty spaces are what we consider discontent workers. Your number of discontent workers is equal to the number of empty subsections without a happy face. Discontent workers don't really do anything on their own, but can provide negative effects to your civilization through events. For example, the Rebellion event card will force players to spend 2 civil actions without any effects per discontent worker. If you don't have any source of happy faces, available workers can temporarily entertain empty subsections. The worker allocated to temporarily take the place of a happy face is still considered available and can be used for buildings and units. While this can prevent uprisings, these empty subsections are still considered discontent workers. We've already explained how to purchase civil cards from the card row, but I'd like to mention here that except for the first turn, cards will be removed from the game at the end of every turn. The card in the leftmost space, if any, will be removed every turn for a 4-player game, the 2 cards in the leftmost spaces, if any, in a 3-player game, and the cards in the 3 leftmost spaces in a 2-player game. This will be represented by an X icon on the upper right side of the leftmost cards in the card row. We've also explained how some of the civil cards work, so we'll just explain here the remaining cards we haven't discussed yet. Playing a civil card from your hand will cause one civil action, and depending on the type of card, different things might occur. Aside from the civil action cost to play a card, some cards have science costs, which are represented by this blue circle icon on the upper left side. For example, this card costs 4 science in addition to the 1 civil action to play the card. Cards with this cost are called technology cards. When played, most of these cards will provide a new function for your civilization. Each technology card belongs to a specific type or category denoted by the icon on the upper right side of each technology card. Take note that you are not allowed to take a technology with the same name as one you already have in play or in your hand. Brown technology cards represent farms and mines, which are your primary source of food and resource respectively. Gray cards represent urban buildings, which can increase your other statistics such as military strength, happiness, science production, and culture production. Playing these cards do not provide effects on their own, as they only represent gaining the blueprint for these types of buildings. This is represented by the empty spaces that will appear on your screen once the cards have been played. To gain the benefits of these technologies, you'll have to construct the specific building, and constructing a building will cost resources and available population. To construct these buildings, you can click on any of the available buildings which will present the options available. The yellow circles represent how many of each we already have, and the icons below each card represent the benefits that each of these buildings will provide. For instance, we currently have 2 farms that provide 1 food production each, 2 mines that provide 1 resource production each, 1 lab that provides 1 science production, and we have no temples. The circle icons represent the cost in resource to construct one of these buildings. As mentioned earlier, you can find the current number of your resources up here, but they are also represented by blue resource icons here in the mines. As an example, let's say we wanted to construct a temple to gain 1 culture production and 1 happiness. A temple costs 3 resources, and we currently have 5, so this option is available to us. By clicking on the card, we are reminded of the costs, 1 civil action, 2 resources, and 1 population. So going back, we can click this button, and as we can see, we now have a temple, our culture production has increased by 1, and we now have 1 happy face that covers the rightmost box in the yellow bank. Aside from constructing buildings, for 1 civil action, you can also upgrade them provided you have already played the required technology. Let's take a look at an example to help us explain this concept. In this scenario, I played the Alchemy Technology card, which is an upgrade for our Philosophy Technology, which is why it's located on top of it. To determine which technologies are upgraded versions, you can check a Technology card's icon on the upper right side of the card, and their age number here in the top center. As you can see, the Alchemy's icon matches the Philosophy's icon and is an age higher. By clicking on the Alchemy building, we'll see here that aside from building one of these that cost a civil action, 6 resources, and an available population, we can instead upgrade the Philosophy building that we already have. In this case, the resource cost will be the difference of the 2 technologies' resource cost. A Philosophy building costs 3 resources, and an Alchemy building costs 6 resources. So upgrading a Philosophy building to an Alchemy building will only cost 3 resources. After confirming the upgrade, we'll see that the yellow population token has moved up, and our science production has changed from 1 to 2. Upgrading buildings is a good way to increase any one of your productions if you don't have an available population, or if increasing your population will put you at risk of having discontent workers or an uprising. Aside from constructing and upgrading buildings, for 1 civil action, you can also destroy them if you're in dire need of a population, or if a specific building is no longer useful to you. To destroy a building, you can simply click on a technology with constructed buildings, and the destroy option will be available. Red technology cards, or military units, work the same way as gray and brown technology cards, with the exception that building, upgrading, and disbanding units will cost military actions instead of civil actions, as indicated here by a red circle icon as opposed to the lighter shade shown on other cards. Building and upgrading military units is the main way of increasing your military strength, and they work the same way as other buildings, with each allocated population token on a military unit increasing your strength by the indicated number on the card. Blue technology cards simply provide ongoing bonuses, such as increased military strength, increased actions, and so on. Orange technology cards represent governments. By clicking here on the right side of the screen, you'll find your current government and everything that it provides. Your government will dictate how many military and civil actions you'll have per turn, not counting any bonuses from other played or acquired cards. Another important thing your government dictates, indicated by this symbol on the lower right side of the card, is the maximum number of urban buildings that each technology type can have. For example, our current limit is 2. We already have 2 laboratory buildings in philosophy, which means if we wanted to build a third laboratory, we will need to upgrade our government first before we'll be able to do so. There are 2 ways to change governments in the game as indicated by the 2 science costs on the upper left side of government cards. The first way is a peaceful conversion. If choosing this option, you'll be required to pay for the higher amount. The other option is declaring a revolution. In this case, you will pay for the smaller science cost. However, in addition, it will also cost all of your civil actions for the turn. Red military cards are tactic cards. They cost 1 military action to play as indicated by the red circle icon here on the upper left side. They temporarily increase your military strength when played as long as you have the required units. For example, this tactics card will give us 1 additional military strength when played if we have 2 infantry units. If you lose units in any way that will result in you no longer having the prerequisites for your tactics, you will immediately lose the strength it provides. However, gaining the units back will immediately gain you the bonus strength as well. When played, a tactics card is exclusive to you for 1 turn. However, for the subsequent turns, it will be placed here in the common tactics area and will be available for other players to copy the tactic. If you wish to copy an available tactic here, it will cost 2 military actions. And each player's active tactic will be indicated here as well with the banner of their player color. Some tactics cards have 2 military strength numbers. For instance, the Conquistadors show a 5 and a 3. For you to gain the higher bonus, your units must come from technologies of the same age as the tactic card or 1 age lower. If some of the units used to fulfill a tactics requirement are 2 ages behind, then you'll only receive the smaller bonus. For example, in this scenario, we currently have the age 2 Conquistadors tactic card in our hand, and our military strength is currently at 12. This tactic card requires 1 infantry unit and 2 cavalry units. We currently have all the required units, but our warrior is still an age A unit. After playing the tactics card, we'll see that we only receive a bonus of 3 military strength because one of our units is outdated. After upgrading our infantry unit, we'll see that aside from the 2 additional military strength that our new infantry unit provides, we also received an additional 2 military strength that completes the 5 military strength bonus that the Conquistadors tactic card provides. During this phase, players will discard excess military cards. As mentioned earlier, your current maximum number of military actions will dictate the maximum number of military cards you can have in your hand. This is where this becomes relevant. During this step, you will be given the option to choose cards you'd like to discard so that you meet your current hand limit. While this phase is mostly automated, we'll still need to explain it as it covers some important consequences our actions might have caused that ideally we'd want to always avoid. The first step is to check for an uprising. If you have empty subsections in your yellow bank and not enough happy faces or available workers to keep them happy, your civilization will face an uprising. During an uprising, the succeeding steps in the production phase are skipped, meaning you don't produce any food, resource, science, and culture for the turn, heavily handicapping you for the next turn. As an example, in this scenario, we currently have an empty subsection in the yellow bank, but no happy faces or available population to stand in for happy faces. After ending the turn, we suffer an uprising and the rest of the production phase is skipped. Corruption is then checked. Like an uprising, this is another consequence of not properly managing your civilization, although the penalty is not as bad. Corruption refers to your food, resource, and blue bank. If you're gaining too much resource and/or food and not spending enough, this icon will appear in the blue bank indicating the penalty you'll receive during the production phase. Take note that the more food and resources kept from the blue bank will lead to higher penalties as indicated by the division of the sections. Not having any blue tokens in the rightmost box during the production phase will incur a -2 corruption penalty. Not having anything in the second box will incur a -4 penalty, and so on. The negative number indicates how many stockpiled resources you lose during the production phase. If you don't have enough or any resources to pay for the corruption penalty, the penalty will be taken from your stockpiled food. After checking and resolving corruption, food, resource, science, and culture is then produced, and you'll be able to draw new military cards depending on remaining unused military actions. Buildings you have on farm technologies will produce one blue token each. Take note that each blue token on a farm doesn't necessarily indicate one food. The food amount that a blue token represents depends on the farm technology it's in. For instance, the selective breeding technology indicates 3 food. This means that any blue token on this card represents 3 food. If any food spending required change, the blue tokens will be reallocated among farm technologies to properly represent the current amount of food we should have. Resource production works exactly like food, so we won't need to explain this any further. After producing food, an amount will be consumed depending on the number of empty population subsections as mentioned earlier. By clicking on the population, you'll see the amount of food that will be consumed. Take note that this doesn't accumulate. Rather, the leftmost empty subsection's food consumption will be the number considered. If you don't have enough food to pay for the consumption cost, you will lose 4 culture points for each food you were not able to pay. An age ends once the corresponding deck of civil cards deplete. You can find the current number of upcoming cards of the current age here on the upper right side of the screen. Once an age ends, several things will occur. First, any antiquated cards, meaning cards from the previous age from all players' hands, are discarded. Antiquated leaders and antiquated unfinished wonders are also discarded. Each player will also lose 2 yellow tokens from their respective yellow banks. And the new set of civil and military cards corresponding to the new age will become available as well. Once age 3 ends, the current round will be played out so that everyone has had an equal number of turns, and everyone gets one final turn in addition. In this case, the card row will no longer be replenished. After everyone has played their last turn, all remaining events, both current and future, will be evaluated. Take note that most age 3 events provide culture points depending on different conditions. For example, the Impact of Technology event card, when resolved, will give all players 4 culture points for each level 3 technologies they have in play. And again, the player with the most culture points win the game. One event we haven't explained are territories or colonies. These are event cards that provide both immediate and ongoing effects to the player who's able to acquire it. Icons in the center of the card represent the immediate bonuses, while icons at the bottom of the card represent ongoing or production bonuses. For example, Strategic Territory, when acquired, will immediately provide 3 military cards and an ongoing bonus of 2 military strength. Once a territory gets revealed, a bidding for it commences. Let's take a look at an example to see how bidding for territories work. In this scenario, the developed territory was revealed from the current events deck, and we are now given the option to bid for it if we want to. During a bidding, all players will secretly decide how much they are willing to bid. You use military units and their strength, the bottom icon of military bonus cards, and any colonization modifiers found in acquired technologies to bid for territories. You can find each player's colonization modifiers here on the right side of the screen, beside each player's portrait. We currently have 2 military units, 4 military bonus cards, and a colonization modifier that comes from our built Colossus Wonder. Let's say we wanted to get this territory. First, we'll need to allocate at least 1 military unit. We currently have a knight and a warrior. While the knight provides 2 strength, they are more expensive, and I think we have enough military bonus cards to win this anyway. So we'll just choose the warrior in addition to all our military bonus cards that provide 1 colonization modifier each. As we can see, we are currently bidding with a 6. 1 point comes from our warrior, 4 from our bonus cards, and 1 from the Colossus. After confirming the bid, we can see that we did win this territory, and here we can see the bid that each of our opponents made. The highest bid wins, and ties are broken by turn order beginning with the current player. If you win, you usually won't have to pay as much as you bid. Using the same elements used for bidding, with at least 1 military unit, you'll only need to create a colonization force high enough to beat the second best bid, which in this case is 4 by the green player. After confirming the win, we now have to pay using the same elements. Again, we need to pay with at least 1 unit, which is what our warrior is for, and we'll add 2 military bonus cards to reach the required number of 4. Take note that you can see here your new military strength after the territory has been paid for. Since we are paying with the warrior, which is required for our current tactics card that provides 2 military strength, Our military strength after this payment will decrease from 8 to 5. After confirming the payment, we can now see here that we have one territory, and by clicking on it, we'll be reminded of what bonuses the territory provides. Through the Ages is a game that allows huge turns due to players having all actions available at once. So it's possible to realize that you had a better option, or you've made a mistake during your turn. The game allows you to undo actions by pressing this button on the lower right side of the screen. However, you can only undo actions that doesn't reveal any new information. For example, during this turn, I played an event card as my political action, which revealed an event card from the current events deck. I also went ahead and used up all my civil actions. Pretending that I want to redo the whole turn for some reason, I am able to undo all of my civil actions, but not my political action, as the action already revealed the top card of the current event deck, which I obviously cannot unlearn. As I mentioned earlier, this isn't a fully comprehensive tutorial. Through the Ages comes with a lot of different cards that can do various things, with more available through the Leaders and Wonders expansion. Regardless, the information provided should be enough for you to be able to start a game knowing what you can do, what you'd like to do, and how you will go about doing those things. Thanks for watching.